Mr. President, thank you for meeting with us at this really historic juncture in
Good to be with you.
Iran relations. So, as I think about it, you've actually had the most intimate and direct negotiations with the Iranian leadership of any president since 1979.
Mm-hmm.
What have you learned from it?
Well, I think that it's important to recognize that Iran's a complicated country, just like we're a complicated country. There is no doubt that, given the history between our two countries, that there is deep mistrust that is not going to fade away immediately. The activities that they engage in, the rhetoric, both anti-American, anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, is deeply disturbing. There are deep trends in the country that are contrary to not only our own national security interests and views, but those of our allies and friends in the region. And those divisions are real. But what we've also seen is that there is a practical streak to the Iranian regime. I think they're concerned about self-preservation. I think they are responsive to some degree to their publics. I think the election of Rouhani indicated that there was an appetite among the Iranian people for a rejoining with the international community, an emphasis on economics and the desire to link up with a global economy. And so what we've seen over the last several years, I think, is the opportunity for those forces within Iran that want to break out of the rigid framework that they've been in for a long time to move in a different direction. It's not a radical break, but it's one that I think offers us the chance for a different type of relationship. And this nuclear deal, I think, is a potential expression of that.
You've had, you sent letters to the Supreme Leader. Obviously, you've been indirectly receiving responses back. Have you learned anything about him in particular and where he is right now through these negotiations?
He's a pretty tough read. I don't have great insight beyond what I think I get from our intelligence folks. I haven't spoken to him directly. In the letters that he sends, there's typically a lot of reminders of what he perceives as past grievances against Iran. But what is, I think, telling is that he did give his negotiators in this deal the leeway, the capability to make important concessions that would allow this framework agreement to come to fruition. So what that tells me is that although he is deeply suspicious of the West, he is, I think, very insular in how he thinks about international issues as well as domestic issues, and deeply conservative. He does realize that the sanctions regime that we put together was weakening Iran over the long term, and that if in fact he wanted to see Iran re-enter the community of nations, then there were going to have to be changes.
Obviously, the Israeli government, we know, has opposed this deal, and they've been consistently against it. A couple of questions I had. One is it time for a U.S.-Israel mutual defense treaty, where we simply signal to Israelis, signal to the region, and most of all to the Iranians, don't even think about this?
Well, if you remember the speech that I gave at the United Nations, I was very clear that one of the core interests of the United States, in my mind, and this is how our administration operated, is that our allies in the region will be protected. We will work with them and come to their defense. And we don't have a greater ally than Israel in the Middle East. And so, what I have done is instruct my team to work with the Israelis to build on the already unprecedented military and intelligence cooperation that's in place. I think even in the midst of the disagreements that I've had with Prime Minister Netanyahu, both on Iran as well as on the Palestinian issue, I've been consistent in saying that our defense of Israel is unshakable. I would consider it a failure on my part, a fundamental failure of my presidency, if on my watch, or as a consequence of work that I had done, Israel was rendered more vulnerable.
Not just a strategic failure.
And I think that's not just a strategic failure, I think that would be a moral failure. I think that at a time when we see anti-Semitism on the rise in Europe, at the time when the violence and chaos of the Middle East so often expresses itself in the desire to destroy Israel, the easy rhetoric with which people deny the Holocaust. That's not just an affront to Israel. That is a challenge to the kind of common humanity and the values that we fought for in World War II, and a challenge to what America believes in terms of the worth and dignity of all people. So this is something I feel very deeply, and the question is, are there additional things that we can do to make sure that the Israeli people understand we've got their backs? And that is true in my administration. I am confident it will be true in subsequent administrations. We have shown that through Iron Dome. We've shown it through the military and intelligence cooperations that we've engaged in. I personally have shown it in times where there was great controversy. For example, last summer with respect to Gaza, I was very consistent, despite international cries to the contrary, that Israel has a right to defend itself. And the Israeli people are right to be afraid of the environment that they're in right now.
I mean, they're going to watch this video. What would you say to them to persuade them that this is a deal worth pursuing?
Well, what I'd say to them is this. You have every right to be concerned about Iran. This is a regime that at the highest levels has expressed the desire to destroy Israel, that has denied the Holocaust, that has expressed venomous anti-Semitic ideas, and is a big country with a big population and has a sophisticated military. So Israel is right to be concerned about Iran, and they should be absolutely concerned that Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. What I would say to the Israeli people is, however, that there is no formula, there is no option to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon that will be more effective than the diplomatic initiative and framework that we put forward. And that's demonstrable. We know that a military strike or a series of military strikes can set back Iran's nuclear program for a period of time, but almost certainly will prompt Iran to rush towards a bomb, will provide an excuse for hardliners inside of Iran to say, this is what happens when you don't have a nuclear weapon, America attacks. We know that if we do nothing other than just maintain sanctions, that they will continue with the building of their nuclear infrastructure and will have less insight into what exactly is happening. And so this may not be optimal. In a perfect world, Iran would say, we won't have any nuclear infrastructure at all. But what we know is that this has become a matter of pride and nationalism for Iran. Even those who we consider moderates and reformers are supportive of some nuclear program inside of Iran. And given that they will not capitulate completely, given that they can't meet the threshold that Prime Minister Netanyahu sets forth, there are no Iranian leaders who would do that.
Including recognizing Israel, which he's now asked for.
And given the fact that this is a country that withstood an 8-year war and 1 million people dead, so they've shown themselves willing, I think, to endure hardship when they consider it a point of national pride or, in some cases, national survival. For us to examine those options and say to ourselves, you know what, if we can have vigorous inspections, unprecedented, And we know at every point along their nuclear chain exactly what they're doing. And that lasts for 20 years. And for the first 10 years, their program is not just frozen, but effectively rolled back to a large degree. And we know that even if they wanted to cheat, we would have at least a year before, which is about 3 times longer than we'd have right now. And we would have insights into their programs that we've never had before. In that circumstance, the notion that we wouldn't take that deal right now and that would not be in Israel's interest is simply incorrect. And look, I have to respect the fears that the Israeli people have. And I understand that Prime Minister Netanyahu is expressing the deep-rooted concerns that a lot of the Israeli population feel about this. But what I can say to them is, number one, this is our best bet by far to make sure Iran doesn't get a nuclear weapon. And number two, what we will be doing even as we enter into this deal is sending a very clear message to the Iranians and to the entire region that if anybody messes with Israel, America will be there. And I think the combination of a diplomatic path that puts the nuclear issue to one side, while at the same time sending a clear message to the Iranians that you have to change your behavior more broadly, and that we are going to protect our allies if you continue to engage in destabilizing aggressive activity. I think that's a combination that potentially, at least, not only assures our friends, but starts bringing down the temperature. And as you know, Tom, the issue here is not just Iran's conflict with Israel. The issue is also Iran's conflict with the Sunni states. And what I've done alongside the negotiations around the Iran nuclear program is also to reach out to the Gulf countries, invite them to Camp David, and suggest to them how can we work together to strengthen their defense capabilities against external aggression, so that in each case, our friends and allies, our traditional friends and allies, who are rightly concerned about Iranian behavior overall, don't think that this somehow changes our traditional commitments.
One thing that I'm not clear about in the draft agreement is the framework. If we suspect that Iran is harboring a nuclear program outside of the facilities, that in southeastern Iran, we discover that on a military base there, is it your understanding it is our right to inspect that facility, anywhere in Iran, not just the known nuclear sites?
Well, there are a couple of things that I think are important.
Been a lot of debate about
Absolutely.
this. It'd be good to clarify.
In the first instance, what we've agreed to is that we will be able to inspect and verify what's happening along the entire nuclear chain, from the uranium mines all the way through to the final facilities like Natanz. What that means is that we're not just going to have a bunch of folks posted at 2 or 3 or 5 sites. We are going to be able to see what they are doing across the board. And in fact, if they now wanted to initiate a covert program that was designed to produce a nuclear weapon, they'd have to completely duplicate. They'd have to create a whole different supply chain. That's point number one. Point number two, we're actually going to be setting up a procurement committee that examines what they're importing, what they're bringing in that they might claim as dual use, to determine whether or not what they're using is something that would be appropriate for a peaceful nuclear program versus a weapons program. And number three, what we're going to be doing is setting up a mechanism whereby, yes, IAEA inspectors can go any place.
Any place in Iran?
Now,
that we suspect.
That we suspect.
Yeah.
Obviously, a request will have to be made. Iran could object. Mm-hmm. But what we have done is to try to design a mechanism whereby once those objections are heard, that it is not a final veto that Iran has, but in fact some sort of international mechanism will be in place that makes a fair assessment as to whether there should be an inspection, and if they determine it should be, that's the tiebreaker, not Iran saying, no, you can't come here. So overall, what we're seeing is not just the additional protocols that IEA has imposed on countries that are suspected of in the past having had problematic nuclear programs. We're going even beyond that. And Iran will be subject to the kinds of inspections and verification mechanisms that have never been put in place before. They'll be as vigorous as they've ever been.
I want to go back to your point about our Sunni Arab allies and Iran. You've spoken about the need to make our relationship, our strategy in the region, have more of an equilibrium to it. I wonder if you could talk about that, Mr. President, and also how do we do that without Saudi Arabia and Iran fundamentally, burying the hatchet or finding a way to contain the whole Sunni-Shiite conflict?
Well, here's how I think about it, Tom. I think that our friends in the region, our traditional Sunni states, have some very real external threats, but they also have some internal threats. They have the internal threat of populations that in some cases are alienated, youth that are underemployed, an ideology that is destructive and nihilistic, and in some cases just a belief that there are no legitimate political outlets for grievances. And so part of our job is to work with these states and say, how can we build your defense capabilities against external threats? But also, how can we strengthen the body politic in these countries so that Sunni youth feel that they've got something other than ISIL to choose from, and that's going to be a generational process. We're not going to be able to do that overnight, and by the way, ultimately it'll be up to those societies to do it. The conversations I want to have with the Gulf countries is, first and foremost, how do they build more effective defense capabilities? I think when you look at what happens in Syria, for example, there's been a great desire for the United States to get in there and do something. But the question is, why is it that we can't have Arabs fighting on behalf of the terrible human rights abuses that have been perpetrated or fighting against what Assad has done? I also think that I can send a message to them about the U.S.'s commitments to work with them and ensure that they are not invaded from the outside. And that perhaps will ease some of their concerns and allow them to have a more fruitful conversation with the Iranians. What I can't do, though, is commit to dealing with some of these internal issues that they have without them making some changes that are more responsive to their people. And I think that, I guess one way of thinking about this, Tom, is when it comes to external aggression, I think we're going to be there for our friends. And I want to see how we can formalize that a little bit more than we currently have, and also help build their capacity so that they feel more confident about their ability to protect themselves from external aggression. But I think the biggest threats that they face may not be coming from Iran invading. It's going to be from dissatisfaction inside their own countries. Now that, disentangling that from real terrorist activity inside their country, how we sort that out, how we engage in the counterterrorism cooperation that's been so important to our own security without automatically legitimizing or validating whatever repressive tactics they may employ. I think that's a tough conversation to have, but it's one that we have to have.
clearly there's a debate inside Iran also on this issue. And obviously you got extremists who will oppose any deal, but it feels like a legitimate debate inside going on that you've triggered. What would you say to the Iranian people about why this is a good deal for them?
What I'd say to the Iranian people is if we take the Supreme Leader's fatwa seriously, and that was preceded by Ayatollah Khomeini's
fatwa that they will not have a nuclear
that they will not have a nuclear weapon, then the notion that they would want to expend so much on a symbolic program as opposed to harnessing the incredible talents and ingenuity and entrepreneurship of the Iranian people and be part of the world economy and see their nation excel in those terms, that should be a pretty straightforward choice for them. Iran doesn't need nuclear weapons to be a powerhouse in the region. For that matter, what I'd say to the Iranian people is, you don't need to be anti-Semitic or anti-Israel or anti-Sunni to be a powerhouse in the region. I mean, the truth is, Iran has all these potential assets going for it, where if it was a responsible international player, if it did not engage in aggressive rhetoric against its neighbors, if it didn't express anti-Israeli and anti-Jewish sentiment, if it maintained a military that was sufficient to protect itself, but was not engaging in a whole bunch of proxy wars around the region, by virtue of its size, its resources, and its people, it'd be an extremely successful regional power. And so, my hope is that the Iranian people begin to recognize that. Clearly, part of the psychology of Iran is rooted in past experiences, the sense that their country was undermined, that the United States or the West meddled in first their democracy, and then in supporting the Shah, and then in supporting Iraq and Saddam during that extremely brutal war. And so part of what I've told my team is we have to distinguish between the ideologically driven offensive Iran and the defensive Iran that it feels vulnerable and sometimes is maybe reacting because they perceive that as the only way that they can avoid repeats of the past. And hopefully, if we're able to get this deal finalized, and I want to emphasize, we're not done yet. There are a lot of details to be worked out, and you could see backtracking and slippage and real political difficulties both in Iran and obviously here in the United States Congress.
Still not 50-50.
So
it's better than 50-50.
It's better than 50-50 now, but we still got work to do.
Yeah.
But if we're able to get this done, then what may happen, and I'm not counting on it, but what may happen is that those forces inside of Iran that say, we don't need to view ourselves entirely through the lens of our war machine. Let's excel in science and technology and job creation and developing our people. That those folks get stronger. And I say that, Tom, but emphasizing that the nuclear deal that we've put together is not based on the idea that somehow the regime changes. It is a good deal, even if Iran doesn't change at all. Even for somebody who believes, as I suspect Prime Minister Netanyahu believes, that there's no difference between Rouhani and the Supreme Leader, and they're all adamantly anti-West and anti-Israel and perennial liars and cheaters, even if you believed all that, this still would be the right thing to do. It would still be the best option for us to protect ourselves. In fact, you could argue that if they are implacably opposed to us, all the more reason for us to want to have a deal in which we know what they're doing, and that for a long period of time, we can prevent them from having a nuclear weapon.
You've knocked down a wall with Burma. You knocked down a bigger wall with Cuba, and potentially you're going to knock down a really big wall with Iran. I actually started as a journalist in 1979. I realized my whole career has really been defined by hostility, and for my whole generation in this relationship. I feel like underneath there is a bit of an Obama doctrine in there, and it's take care of all the strategic concerns, satisfy them as much as you can, but you do believe that the engagement is possible, that engagement can lead to different outcomes that are unpredictable, in advance. Do I have that right? And how do you see it, Mr. President?
You know what I'd combine it with, though, Tom, is also a sense that we are powerful enough to be able to test these propositions without putting ourselves at risk.
That's interesting.
And that's the thing that sometimes, as I hear these debates going on, people don't seem to understand. You take some country like Cuba. For us to test the possibility that engagement leads to a better outcome for the Cuban people, there aren't that many risks for us. It's a tiny little country. It's not one that threatens our core security interests. And so for us to test the proposition, and if it turns out that it doesn't lead to better outcomes, we can adjust our policies. The same is true with respect to Iran, a larger country, a dangerous country, one that has engaged in activities that result in the death of U.S. citizens. But the truth of the matter is, Iran's defense budget is $30 billion. Our defense budget is closer to $600 billion. Iran understands that they cannot fight us.
And you believe they are deterrable. And it's notion that they're undeterrable.
Is simply not the case. So for us to say, let's try, understanding that we're preserving all our options, that we're not naive, but if in fact we can resolve these issues diplomatically, we are more likely to be safe, more likely to be secure, in a better position to protect our allies. And who knows, Iran may change. If it doesn't, our deterrence capabilities, our military superiority stays in place. So to use a simple analogy, it's not as if in all these conversations I'm leaving all my rifles at the door. We're walking these negotiations, and everybody knows that we've got the most firepower, and we're not relinquishing our capacity to defend ourselves or our allies. In that situation, why wouldn't we test it? And now, what you might hear from Prime Minister Netanyahu, which I respect, is the notion, look, Israel's more vulnerable. We don't have the luxury of testing these propositions the way you do. And I completely understand that. And further, I completely understand Israel's belief that given the tragic history of the Jewish people, they can't be dependent solely on us for their own security. But what I would say to them is that not only am I absolutely committed to making sure that they maintain their qualitative military edge, and that they can deter any potential future attacks. But what I'm willing to do is to make the kinds of commitments that would give everybody in the neighborhood, including Iran, clarity that if Israel were to be attacked by any state, that we would stand by them. And that, I think, should be
I mean, you've just made that commitment right now. I mean, that's a signal to them.
That should be sufficient to take advantage of this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see whether or not we can at least take the nuclear issue off the table. The one thing that changes the equation is when these countries get a nuclear weapon. Then how we approach countries necessarily changes. Witness North Korea, which is a problem state that is rendered a lot more dangerous because of their nuclear program. If we can prevent that from happening in any place else in the world, that's something where it's worth taking some risks.
Two quick questions to close, Mr. President. One is on Congress. If the deal's this good, why not let them debate it and approve it? And I understand the other side of it, which is there are people there who really want to debate it just to reject it. Is there a middle ground? Let them debate it and have a non-binding resolution. Obviously their choice, not yours, but how are you thinking about that now?
Yeah, I think I've reached out to Speaker Boehner and Mitch McConnell, as well as Nancy Pelosi and Harry Reid. And what I've said to them is we will not only go through all the details of what the current framework is and provide them updates in terms of how the negotiations go going forward, but we are committed to finding a mechanism for appropriate congressional involvement and oversight. You're right, Tom, that what I'm not interested in seeing is folks who are hell-bent on just defeating any deal, aren't interested in listening to the nuclear scientists, aren't interested in listening to the experts, but are viewing this purely through the lens of partisanship. I'm not interested in endangering a very critical international agreement on that basis. Number two is I've got to be concerned about setting precedents. There has been a suggestion on the part of some members of Congress that the President of the United States doesn't have the power to enter into binding agreements with other countries. Well, there are a whole bunch of agreements that we make all over the world, from protecting our troops when they're on foreign soil to arrangements that fall short of a formal treaty but have always been understood to be binding on the United States of America as part of our international leadership and international commitments. And I don't want to set precedents that suggest that every time a president enters into one of these agreements that Congress gets an up or down vote. But having said that, I do think that Senator Corker, the head of the Foreign Relations Committee, is somebody who's sincerely concerned about this issue and is a good and decent man. And my hope is that we can find something that allows Congress to express itself, but does not encroach on traditional presidential prerogatives, and ensures that if in fact we get a good deal, that we can go ahead and implement it.
So one of the things that's really, I wonder if it's concerning you, is that we've seen people crossing some red lines here. We've seen senators writing a letter to a foreign leader in the middle of negotiations. We've seen people fighting a foreign leader here outside the normal channels of meeting with the president. What's going on here?
I do worry that some traditional boundaries in how we think about foreign policy have been crossed. I thought the letter that was sent to the Supreme Leader was inappropriate. I think that you'll recall there were some deep disagreements with President Bush about the Iraq War, but the notion that you would have had a whole bunch of Democrats sending letters to leaders in the region or European leaders who were not part of the coalition trying to undermine the president's policies, I think is troubling. The bottom line is that we're going to have serious debates, serious disagreements, and I welcome those because that's how our democracy is supposed to work. And in today's international environment, whatever arguments we have here, other people are hearing and reading about. It's not a secret that the Republicans may feel more affinity with Prime Minister Netanyahu's views of the Iran issue than they do with mine. But keeping that within some formal boundaries so that the executive branch, when it goes overseas, when it's communicating with foreign leaders, is understood to be speaking on behalf of the United States of America, not a divided States of America. Making sure that whether that president is a Democrat or a Republican, that once the debates have been had here, that he or she is the spokesperson on behalf of U.S. foreign policy. And that's clear to every leader around the world. That's important because without that, what you start getting is multiple foreign policies, confusion among foreign powers as to who speaks for who. And that ends up being a very dangerous circumstance that could be exploited by our enemies and could deeply disturb our friends.
You also get Israel becoming a Republican cause, not a bipartisan cause.
Well, this is an area that I've been concerned about. Look, Israel's a robust, rowdy democracy just like ours, and there are very few countries in the world that where we share so much. We share blood, family, the cultural ties that are unequaled. And part of what has always made the U.S.-Israeli relationship so special is that it has transcended party. And I think that has to be preserved. There has to be the ability for me to disagree with a policy on settlements, for example, without being viewed as, in some fashion, opposing Israel. There has to be a way for Prime Minister Netanyahu to disagree with me on policy without being viewed as anti-democrat. And I think the right way to do it is to recognize that as many commonalities as we have, there are going to be strategic differences here. And I think that it is important for each side to respect the debate that takes place in the other country and not to try to work just with one side. Again, it has to do with those boundaries in the sense that ultimately you have governments dealing with governments when it comes to foreign policy. That I think has to be maintained. But this has been as hard as anything I do because of the deep affinities that I feel for the Israeli people and for the Jewish people. It's been a hard, hard period of time.
Personally. I mean,
it has been personally difficult for me to hear the sort of expressions that somehow we don't have. This administration has not done everything it could to look out for Israel's interest, and the suggestion that when we have very serious policy differences, that's not in the context of a deep and abiding friendship and concern and understanding of the threats that the Jewish people have faced historically and continue to face. That's something that I feel deeply and I feel personally, and will continue to do so.
Mr. President, the one question I got, and we'll stop here, is that so many people asked me to ask is, when exactly do the sanctions come off? A lot of confusion there in what's come out from both sides. If you could clarify that, that would be really helpful.
And
Is it after?
there are still details to be worked out. But I think that the basic framework calls for Iran to take the steps that it needs to around Fordow and the centrifuges and so forth. At that point, then the UN sanctions are suspended, although the sanctions related to proliferation, the sanctions related to ballistic missiles, there's a set of sanctions that remain in place. Mm-hmm. And at that point, then we preserve the ability to snap back those sanctions if there is a violation. If not, though, Iran, outside of the proliferation and ballistic missile issues that stay in place, they're able to get out from under the sanctions, understanding that this constant monitoring will potentially trigger some sort of action if they're in violation. There are U.S. sanctions that are related to Iran's behavior in terrorism, Iran's behavior with respect to human rights abuses. There are certain sanctions that we have that would remain in place because they're not related to Iran's nuclear program. And this, I think, gets to a central point that we've made consistently. If, in fact, we are able to finalize the nuclear deal, and if Iran abides by it, that's a big piece of business that we've gotten done. But it does not end our problems with Iran, and we are still going to be aggressively working with our allies and friends to reduce and hopefully at some point stop the destabilizing activities that Iran has engaged in, the sponsorship of terrorist organizations. And that may take some time, but it's our belief, it's my belief, that we will be in a stronger position to do so if the nuclear issue has been put in a box. And if we can do that, it's possible that Iran, seeing the benefits of sanctions relief, starts focusing more on the economy and its people. And
investment will be coming
in. Starts coming in, and the country starts opening up. If we've done a good job in bolstering the sense of security and defense cooperation between us and the Sunni states, if we have made even more certain that the Israeli people are absolutely protected, not just by their own capacities, but also by our commitments, then what's possible is you start seeing an equilibrium in the region, and Sunni and Shia, Saudi and Iran, start saying, maybe we should lower tensions and focus on the extremists like ISIL that would burn down this entire region if they could.
But the Iranians need to know that if they cheat, that you won't hesitate also to take any option off the table.
We will absolutely not hesitate. That option always remains. And this goes back to the earlier point that you asked about an Obama doctrine. The doctrine is we will engage, but we preserve all our capabilities. And I've been very clear that Iran will not get a nuclear weapon on my watch, and I think they should understand that we mean it. But I say that hoping that we can conclude this diplomatic arrangement and that it ushers a new era in U.S.-Iranian relations, and just as importantly, over time, a new era in Iranian relations with its neighbors. Because our interest is, the one thing I always tell folks in the region, whatever has happened in the past, at this point, the U.S.'s core interests in the region are not oil, are not territorial strategic concerns. Our core interests are that everybody is living in peace, that it is orderly, that our allies are not being attacked, that children are not having barrel bombs dropped on them, that massive displacements aren't taking place. You know, our interests in this sense are really just making sure that the region is working. And if it's working well, then we'll do fine. And you know, that's going to be a big project given what's taken place, but I think this is at least one place to start.
Mr. President, thank you for meeting with us right now. This is a really important time, and appreciate this.
I enjoyed it.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
So much.